Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Clerics Wear Ringmail. Or it's evening enough when I am recording this here segment, and I have another special guest for you today. Special treat. I'm here with my buddy Steven. He is the mind behind the World of Weirth, a supplement for the low fantasy gaming rule set. Steven, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much for coming on. It's exciting to have you. So, how's the week treating you so far?
It's been good. The weather has been beautiful. We're here in the New England area, and it's very warm and sunny. It's been really nice.
Oh, nice. I like hearing that. Like hearing it. So, I'm down here in Florida, so it's sunny every day, except when there's a hurricane.
We're from 3 to 4 when it rains for 45 minutes.
That is true. You have been to Florida before. It sounds like.
I, yeah, I lived there when I was just a kid.
Oh, that's cool. What part, if you don't mind me asking?
In Tampa.
Tampa. Yep. My cousin lives down there. Actually, yeah. My cousin and his family are Tampa natives. So small world, my friend. I did
Yeah,
not. I did not.
absolutely.
Yeah, I did not know that, listeners. Before I asked it, so it really is a small world. That's
Yeah,
fun.
well, I lived there back in the '70s, that late '70s. So I'm sure it's a completely different city than it was back then.
Yeah, I'll have to ask my dad. He lived there in the '80s, so slightly later than you did. I think he went to school down there. What is it? USF is in Tampa.
I think so.
Okay,
It's
yeah,
just, or it's close by. Yeah.
yeah. I'm glad he doesn't listen to my podcast because he would be on my case for messing that up. But anyway, again, thank you for coming on. And so, like I said, Stephen is the author of the World of Weirth. It is a supplement for low fantasy gaming, and he's got a presence on social media. He's got a Twitter, at least, that I'm following, and a website that I can link you over to. These will be in the show notes for reference. And he comes to the hobby with a long experience. So he's been doing this for a while, and you can feel it in some of the stuff he puts together. So, Stephen, I'll, how did you get into role playing games? Out of curiosity.
Oh, back back in the dark ages, um, some of my middle school friends, they had older brothers, and the older brothers were going off to college. And so I believe it was the summer of '82, which would have been between sixth grade and seventh grade for us. We were initiated into the mysteries of the Holmes Basic set.
Um,
And shortly after that, a couple, three campaigns sprung up, and everybody wanted to be a dungeon master, so we all played in each other's games. And then pretty soon we discovered the hardbound advanced Dungeons and Dragons books,
oh,
and
beautiful. The older
the
sibling
rest.
left the stone tablets behind when they went to college.
Well, no, all they left us was the Holmes book. We found that there was an advanced version in the bookstore,
Oh, that's
and
fun.
that really we went wild over that. So and of course, just being kids, we took turns and we saved our lawn mowing money. And I remember one of us bought the Dungeon Master's Guide, another one bought the Player's Handbook, and another one bought the Monster Manual. And we all took turns reading them and trying to memorize as much as possible.
No,
And so then, of course, we played a crazy mashup of Holmes and AD&D for the next few years.
no, that's they work together. I guess that's the beauty of the TSR editions. It's funny you mentioned buying the independent books and then sharing them between the group. I wish I had figured that out. I never figured that out until college, and that's a smart thing. I'm going to write that down and try to send that back quantum leap style. But Holmes
Although I'll
Bay.
tell you what, by the end of seventh grade, one of my friends and I, we had both managed to scrimp and save, and we each had all three books. And like the classic nerds, we carried them with us everywhere we went in a duffel bag. With a quad ruled pad and a bunch of papers and pencils and different colored pens. So at any moment, if we had nothing to do, we could break out and start working on a dungeon of some kind.
Oh, wonderful! And for those of you who may be newer to the hobby, the duffel bag was essential. One, those books were built like center blocks. I'm pretty sure some of the leftovers they use them down here in the St. Augustine, Jacksonville area to build shelters on the beach that'll withstand the hurricanes when they roll through. But moreover, too, they were a little heavy. So when the satanic panic types or the jocks would come over and try to disabuse you of your D&D notions, you could always hit them with the duffel bag. And so it was a self-defense mechanism in addition to the carrying capacity. So Holmes Basic and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So that is there's a resurgence of that recently. Holmes had a clone come out, the Blue Home clone, which I have played a little bit of. It's a friend of mine ran a Holmes game, so I downloaded Blue Home to kind of get a bead on what was expected. The AD&D though, that's seeing a wide resurgence on the OSR spheres that I tend to go around in. So for the longest time, it was all BX all the time, and I think that's mostly because the BX chassis is easy to break without breaking, so you can take it and do what you want to do with it. AD&D has a little bit more working pieces that go along with it, so you have to be very careful and make sure that if you replace the timing belt with a timing chain, that you got that tensioner set to the right place. But
Yes,
yeah,
that is definitely one way to look at it. Advanced D&D, AD&D, is really it's a continuation. Excuse me, it's a continuation of what had come before with original D&D, the little brown books, in that it continues to be or continued to be a series of subsystems bolted together that made a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that's one of the big complaints that some newer entrants to the role playing arena have about old school Dungeons and Dragons is that there is no unified mechanic, there is no core system that everything you do, almost everything you do, takes a different die, has a different number range, etc. So
yeah,
that's when you grew up with that and that's all you knew, and you were used to that from various other games as well. It didn't seem alien or strange. So the newcomers, when they encounter a newer system that has much more modern design elements and more design thought put into it, that perhaps has a more limited palette of mechanics than looking at the older systems, it looks like a hodgepodge.
yeah,
That hodgepodge
I can see
is
that.
very, very interesting, and I think a lot of people are going back and learning new mechanical tools that have been dropped from games because they just seemed too hard or too weird or didn't make sense. And when you take it as a whole, it really works very well.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And the funny part is, you take. I will be the first to admit that I am not the most well versed on the AD&D line, but I do have the core books, which I picked up on sale as a reprint, and they are thinner. Just looking over at my shelf, they are actually thinner in profile than my third edition books. And so a lot of people, third edition being the edition that introduced for the Dungeons and Dragons franchise that core mechanic, that D20 for everything kind of system, they're smaller. The advanced game, despite its nomenclature, is actually not that hard to grok. And once you take a look at it, there's a lot of density. There's a lot packed into, especially the Dungeon Master's Guide for the first edition of the game. But when you compare that to the editions that followed, even AD&D, which has a reputation for being spooky, It's really not. It's pretty straightforward to understand, and there's not as much to it as you would come to expect with a game like the. I don't know enough about fifth edition to compare the two, but with third, I can personally vouch that AD&D and third edition, the crunch is on the side of the newer game.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. And the other interesting thing about the games are the books of the older editions are thinner, partially because the authors and creators of those books building on a foundation, and they were building or writing those rules assuming that their audience already knew a whole bunch of other things related to role-playing games, related to war games, related to you know fiction and science fiction literature, fantasy literature. Those There are lots and lots of assumptions baked into those books, so they can be smaller because you're supposed to know what these things are already.
Yep, things that folks would have learned playing at the hobby shops of their time.
Right, or just assumed. When they read a rule, say something like, you can, as a first level magic user, you're able to hold one spell in your mind. If you've read the Jack Vance books, then you'll understand that magic spells are almost like living creatures, and you have to overcome them and basically trap them in your brain in order to be able to utilize their power. And so there's a reason that as an inexperienced wizard, you would only be able to hold one in your mind. And as you gain experience and strength, you can hold more and more. And then once you let that energy out, it's gone. The living creature, as it were, of the spell has gone and done its thing, and you just don't have it anymore. It's
Yep.
not as though it's a formula or a poem, or a story or something that you just memorize and recite. And why does it go away? That doesn't make any sense. I remember, this, I remember these songs. I remember things like that, but the spells were assumed to be something completely different than that. And so, even as a young person, when I was first getting into the game, I hadn't read Jack Vance, so it's difficult to understand until someone older pointed that out to me, and I went and found those books.
Yep. Yeah, but understood. It's not a difficult. It's not a difficult thing to have missed Jack Vance as you get later into the century, because he was active and most popular in the 50s and 60s, as I seem to recall. And these days, it's kind of a challenge to get him in print. You can find him on Audible, and I almost signed up for Audible just for that to listen on my commutes. But then 2020 happened, and we won't go into that.
Sure.
But and that leads us into our topic of today. Um, in the string of episodes where I'd been talking with some guests and callers about house rules, Vancian Magic is probably the most house ruled away item for any given game, and it's probably the biggest target for other systems, competitor systems to the big dog in the room, to try to differentiate from from the norm. And Stephen here has brought along his contribution to the challenge. So we'll start in talking about World of Weirth and the system that you've put together.
Yes, the system I put together is, once again, I will be proud to say that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And the system that I wanted to try, the World of Worth, is a campaign setting that started out simply as a method of playtesting a magic system that I had in my head. And it's taken on a life of its own. It's run for 2 years now. Um, I have several players. Two of them have been with me since the beginning. We've had some come and some go, and we've done some open table things. But it's been a lot of fun, and the players are actually very invested in going ahead and building their characters and seeing what happens organically, as opposed to, okay, now we're going to build a fifth level character and see how magic affects that. So they're also very invested in the story. I shouldn't say the story, the background of the setting, um, because it's, I think, something a little different. I decided to go back to the implied setting of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons world, which is post apocalyptic, and I think that modern day designers refer to that as a kind of a points of light style campaign. But basically, yeah, humanity has splintered, and there are nations and kingdoms, but humanity's settlements are isolated and walled and hiding behind power of swords and spears to protect them from the monsters and the ravening hordes.
Yep. And that'll happen to you when a rogue planet passes between Earth and the Moon, causing the.
Indeed.
But
There's a little bit of Thundar in here too. There is a little bit of Thundar. Basically, if I had to throw out some fiction as a reference, I would say the Conan the Barbarian movies from the '80s, the Fred Saberhagen novels, Empire of the East, and yeah, a little Thundar, a little bit of that super science and strange magic that permeates the world. However, I will say this: magic is being forgotten, and actually, memory is a big problem. And so, the solution to that has been, um, I guess, in modern terms, you would say that every magic user in Worth is kind of a warlock, in that they haven't made a patron pact per se, but magic power comes from supernatural entities. And as you grow in power and higher levels, the ability to cast higher level spells requires that you essentially summon and dominate supernatural entity and use its power to modify the world around you.
that's got some Vance vibes to it. Interestingly enough, because as I seem to recall, one of the themes of the Dying Earth was, well, it's obvious Dying Earth is a decadence and decay, but magic itself was stagnant in the Vance novels because the magicians were too busy memorizing by rote what they had learned and trying to take power from what they had, and so it stymied the ability of those wizards to make advancements, to understand what they were doing, almost akin to the Manhattan Project in terms of nuclear energy. We knew that the team knew. I don't know. I just take their word for it. I'm a liberal arts degree, not a physicist. but the but they knew what was happening, but they didn't know why. And so years and years after the atomic era began, we finally started understanding the why behind what was going on. But in the Jack Vance fiction, that why never happened. It was a matter of remembering and rediscovering what someone in a more glorious past had already done and authored.
Right, absolutely. And I am trying to tap into that cargo cult sort of mentality in terms of how magic works and create a scarcity so that the magic using characters spend their time and are very, very invested in seeking out the lost magics of the past.
And that was one of the aspects of the 1982 Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold, that is consistently and perpetually inspired me, is the presence of the supernatural, the obvious influence of the supernatural and magic on the world, but its scarcity. It makes it very special, and it makes it very unique, and that's a very difficult to capture a lot of the time in a game, especially when you look back on classic D&D. The fact of the matter is, a player character, if they happened to roll decent on their wisdom, they can be a cleric now. If they happen to roll decent on their intelligence, it makes sense for them to be a magic user. And so, even if those characters get killed in a horrible dungeoneering mishap, it they come back with a new magic user. So the implied setting, though, no matter how rare you try to make it, because it's accessible to the player characters, and it's less so in the older editions, because as I'm thinking about BX, clerics don't get a spell at first level, and in all of the TSR editions, wizards, they get that one spell at first level, and so you have to be very conscientious of what you're doing with it. So there is a scarcity there, but there's no sense. Folks will have met a magic user. If they don't, it doesn't quite make sense at the character generation. So this is contrasted to the Conan movie and some of the Conan fiction as well. The 1982 film, I will maintain, is more faithful to the fiction than a lot of people give it credit for. But in the Conan stories, the original 1930s pulps, magic and and necromancy and all that fun stuff that existed, and it was terrifying, and it was something that was reviled and he had to fight against. But it was also not the focal point. It was something special and unique in that situation. And so I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there.
Yeah, no, that actually takes us into the next part. The World of Worth character creation process. We do three d6 in order, and we use the 7 ability score attributes of the Low Fantasy Gaming rules set.
Yeah, props to Steve Grod.
Oh, absolutely. This rule set, and I chose this rule set on purpose in order to. Uh, this is going to sound strange, but I wanted to utilize the oldest of the old school philosophy. However, I chose a non-standard AD&D style rule set to break the players out of that D&D mindset where they're knights and what have you rampaging around Northern Europe. The setting is much more desert-like. I would liken it more to a Mediterranean style setting geographically, and get them out of that mindset where we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. No, we are playing low fantasy gaming, and so I think that's had a big effect on a lot of things in play.
Oh, I believe it absolutely. That's expectations are one of the first things that you have to consider for all that fun stuff.
And then after you roll your ability scores and you decide, ooh, I'd like to be a magic user. Well, no, what you do is you roll your ability scores, and then you go down to the magical ability area and you roll a D100, because only 15% of characters have any ability whatsoever to be able to manipulate magic.
Ooh, got some
So
psionicist vibes going on.
if you fail that, or if you don't roll an 86 plus on that D%, then you need to think about another class. And so every time you make a character, then it limits the use of magic. Um, and then we also are very strict about using the percent chance to know spell. One of my players has encountered quite a few spells, and they actually even recovered a couple of spell books. And sadly, he has failed almost every one of his percent chance to know spell rolls, and so he
Oh,
is
rough.
struggling with the idea that he's trapped with the. I do start them with 3 different spells, chosen randomly from a limited list.
So he's not too horked.
No, but one of the he doesn't really have any real offensive spells, and so he's struggling to figure out what exactly he should be doing with those things. So it's interesting, and it makes for interesting play, especially since he only had 1 hit point too, but he's still has managed to make it. He still managed to make it to 3rd level, so that's pretty exciting.
Yep. Normally, you hear hit points in the context of the plural, hit point singular. That's old
Yeah,
school. That's
he
old school for
survived.
you.
He survived several adventures by not getting directly engaged in combat,
Hmm.
and by utilizing his really by playing his role as the magic user and not being more of a leader, being more of a problem solver than trying to get in there and mix it up with the monster.
Mixing it up. So there's a we have the chance to learn, and the way you acquire spells, as you mentioned, is more kind of packed. Do you have magic items like scrolls or kindred items that they can quest
Yes.
for?
Yes, absolutely. Scrolls actually, a magic user character can begin to scribe scrolls at first level. It's one of the skills that they learn as an apprentice, transferring scrolls and imbuing those scrolls with the magical spellcraft power that they need to implement the spell.
Making copies, just like real interns.
Yeah, absolutely. Except there's a little more into it because there's power in these scrolls. So something else I should probably mention is that we use sort of a spell point system
Hmm.
in that each point is kind of a level in casting spells. So a magic user intrinsically has basically 2 points that they can use to power spells. So they'd be able to cast, say, 2 first level spells or 1 second level spell with their own personal energy.
Okay. That actually
And
answers too what my next question was going to be, because I know I have some limited experience with LFG. My buddy Jason over at Mr. Hobbs's Gamerhood, he runs or had run a game he called the Midlands, where it was an LFG West Marches actual play. I will link to those videos in the show notes. Additionally, he had recently done a Thursday night game that I was privileged to be a part of, and that was the day I learned that I am not charismatic enough to play a bard. Need to stick to dour clerics or brutal Vikings apparently, because that's how I roll. But the I have some limited experience with it, but I do know that magic users in LFG, you do start off. They have spells. They're categorized by level, first through sixth, I believe, and you get them in a Vancian sense. You have a number of spell uses that you have based on your level, and when you cast a spell, however, there's an added mechanic, the dark and dangerous magic roll. So I presumably I know that you had played this game a lot more than I have. So based on what I know, based on what my listeners and our friends on the other end of the microphone are gonna know, how would you describe your system by comparison mechanically to how it operates in LFG out the box?
well, the way it compares is you turn the LFG system up to 11 and then season it a little bit with a little DCC. And by that, I mean each spellcaster, when they cast their spell, they do well. Let's start at the beginning. In the morning or at the beginning of their day, they will prepare certain spells, which they can do of the low levels, first and second level. Those spells, they're able to learn from books, learn from scrolls, learn from carvings on stones, things like that. And they can use their personal energy to power them. They can use sympathetic energy gathered from fire or motion from water and things of that nature. They can also power them with blood sacrifice. And as they get into the higher level spells, they'll need to be able to control these supernatural entities in order to gain the spell effects. But when they want to exercise a spell, cast a spell, they need to make what's called a task resolution roll, which I guess you might liken that to a difficulty check. And that's based on their level of training. So they'll make that roll first, find out how effective the spell casting is, and then they'll go ahead and will play out the effects of the spell. If that spell fails, there is a possibility that they'll need to roll on a dark and dangerous magic table of epic proportions, that starts with benign corruption and goes all the way up to major corruption. And some serious bad things can happen, not the least of which is, tear open a dimensional rift and allow extra dimensional creatures to enter our world. So That hasn't happened yet, but it's very possible
Yep.
that can happen. So once they cast their spell, they can actually cast that spell as many times per day as they have the power to do so. If they have a big fire going and they are able to pull the energy from that fire through their sympathy stones, they can cast, magic missile or what have you over and over and over and over again all day long. The drawback, however, is every time they cast that spell, they have to roll that task resolution for spell failure. And if they fail, bad things can happen.
Yep. And I'm just kind of paging through the LFG manual, and I do see in the classic book at least one entry: you transform into a gibbering terror. And I have not looked through the bestiary, but I can only imagine that's not something I want to do. So, and
Right, right, absolutely. And so, yeah, so magic becomes much more dangerous, and failure also can cause fatigue. Um, we do run a fatigue rule in the campaign, and spell casting fatigue, or I should say, fatigue caused by spell casting, will induce hypothermia. And so we have hypothermia rules for that. I have had several times magic users have pushed the limits of their ability in order to be sure to cast a powerful spell and defeat a powerful opponent. And it's had a very detrimental effect, basically taking them out of the game for a couple of days, in game time in order to accomplish their goal. So it very much mirrors the fiction, those old pulp stories where the wizard casts his spell and he's got the people on either side holding him up so that he can continue to cast spells. And at the end of the day, at the end of the battle, he just collapses into a heap, and then he's basically worthless for a week while he recovers.
trying to recover, yeah. That has a little bit of Dragonlance vibes to tie into because the whole upcoming Dragonlance re-release, thinking about Raceland and his cough that he had developed. That also, there's a book. You can tell me if you've read it or not. I believe it's called The Free by Brian Ruckley. It's a newer book. It's
Not
yeah, most of my Appendix N is at or before my birth in terms of when it was released. But this book is an exception. I recommend checking out the first chapter or two. It's got some interesting takes on magic, and specifically, there is an ability that their magic user can perform where he takes the spoiler alert, Jason. But there's a his ability is part of this magical ritual. He binds the wounds of his comrades to himself, so they effectively tie him to a tree in a field 5 miles away from the battle, and then they send their foot soldiers in to fight, and so he literally gets beat all left and right, and has to go on bed rest to get his body on the mend. But the guys in the foot soldiers, the captain, he takes wounds that he just doesn't take. It's they're transferred across the ether, and very very interesting kind of scene in the book there. It changes the dynamic of the relationship between the fighter and the I guess he's a priest archetype. I'm not sure because he's not a priest at all, but he has sort, I guess, the magic user in the sense of the word.
right, and I kind of prefer that term, um, because I don't necessarily have a cleric class either. All magic users are essentially the same in in the world of Worth, and if you're dedicated to a deity, that will affect not only the quality but the number and type of spells that you're able to receive and learn.
Cool. And it changes the roll to understand on the smaller spells, or does it only affect the bigger ones that you get from your patronage?
Well, no, it will have more of an effect on which spells will be available to you.
Okay.
We also use a strict alignment system. However, it is lawful versus chaos, and that's actually explained on my blog. Um, Built on the the oldest uh, system from OD&D, in that you're either for order and civilization, or you're for chaos and entropy. So, but yeah, so effectively, if you are a lawful character, you will have more difficulty casting and or learning the spells provided by the chaotic entities.
Do you have a middle ground out of curiosity? Or is that the.
Not for humans. No, not for humans. Um, the interesting thing, the alignment scale is from 3 to -3, and it's a continuum. It takes 1/2 point steps, and so doing different things can adjust your alignment during a session. And at the end of each session, I do a review and a grade, just like they do in AD&D, to see how it's going to affect your level training when it's time to level up. Because we also do level training with this, which I know is not necessarily part of that official LF rule set.
Yeah,
But like I said,
I may
I'm
have
trying to
ranted
use
about it lately. I
I'm
may have.
trying to use all these old rules in a fresh new setting, in really in an attempt to not break them, but find out what exactly their strengths are. But yeah, so if you are a lawful character and you decide to go ahead and learn and use a chaotic spell, it will have an effect on your alignment, and it will slowly drag you off to the side of chaos. And so humans and other mortals, their alignment can be anywhere from 3 to zero point 0.5, and then from -0.5 to -3, which would be the most chaotic a human can be.
I like that.
Um,
I like that. You're either for it, against it, or you're an infant or a wild animal.
right, right. Now, the other thing is, though, that there are gods and then the old ones, and the gods can go anywhere from, say, 5 to -5, and they can be neutral. And then the great old ones on either side, on the law side or on the chaos side, they start at 3 on the lawful side and go up to 6, I believe 6, or on the chaos side, -3 and go to -6. So they are so lawful and so chaotic that humans literally can't comprehend.
I think I've seen an illustration of this. Have you done an So when I was stalking your blog before we started chatting
It
on
is. It
Discord.
is on my blog. Absolutely. I'll
Yep,
share the link with you so you can
very
share it
cool.
with
Yep, there's a very interesting illustration, and I remember seeing that, and it's fun to hear you explain it because I remember seeing that and thinking that's interesting, because the ancients, the big guys, they represent the paragon of what those extremes are, and that's a very interesting way to tie that together and keep the continuum of the cosmos going.
Right, because at the end of the day, at the far ends of the spectrum, you either have a swirling void of chaos energy, or you have an absolute diamond crystal of pure white light. And so that's as diametrically opposite as you can.
So, are you in the more Moorcock camp or the more Anderson camp for alignment?
I'm going to say the Anderson camp because I specifically use Anderson in this article as an example. I have read the Elric saga. However, I seem to have lost my 2-volume omnibus, and so I'm very disappointed. So I haven't been able to do that research, but I do. That's on my list to go back and read those Elric stories once again.
Yeah, I will make enemies by saying that again, audience. I promise I have not pre-screened. I have not pre-screened Stephen here. We just, I guess, great minds think alike because I'm hardcore in the Anderson camp. I make not enemies, but we'll say I tempt friendships into acquaintances with my passions over Moorcock and how I tend to prefer Anderson, and we'll be vocal about it. But
No, that's good. That's
yeah.
good. And I mean, yeah, I'm looking forward to rereading those with a more thoughtful eye
Hmm.
towards the alignment system.
Hmm.
I remember when I read the Three Hearts and Three Lions, I went into that looking for the alignment
Hmm.
discussions and looking for uh, the appendix and information. And so it was eye opening to to say the least. Reading through that.
Yeah, that was a fun read. I did not expect what I got. Interestingly enough, so it's written, and you can tell me if it this sounds right or wrong. It feels like it's being told to you in a bar, that you got a buddy who's got a cigar with you, and you're both sitting with a nice lager, and he's telling you all about this crazy story that you may or may not believe from him. And it's got that tone, even when it's not in the first person for the protagonist, but the story as it's told feels like it's buddies talking over the whole time. It just that's the tone of the adventure, and it is able to touch on those kind of themes that we talk about, the struggle of cosmic forces of the fairy realms and infringing on the providence of law. But it's definitely interesting. I was not expecting it, based on the love or hate that it gets in various forums. So, and I
Yeah,
owe
that's an interesting take. I guess I've read a lot of the older fiction. I was blessed as a young man to have uncles that had accumulated a very large library of science fiction and a few
mm,
fantasy novels. And so, as a young person, when we would visit my grandparents' house, there was a bookshelf basically filled with all these old paperbacks from the 50s and 60s. And so I got to read all those. So I started very young with my introduction to Appendix N, not knowing what it was, and then later discovering, oh my goodness, this is this and this is that. So it was really cool, and I've spent a very long time, the better part of 25 years, attempting to reassemble that library.
yeah, very cool. And here I was thinking that I had a blessed childhood because my grandparents had Cinemax, and my parents went to bed early. But,
We didn't get the cable. We didn't get the cable at my house until I went to college.
mhm. That sounds familiar. That's when my parents wired up internet at the house, actually. So I didn't have internet, and then I went to college, and then my dad called Comcast and said, "Hey, I need me some high speed now that my son's gone." I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that's how the conversation went.
Yeah, we were still doing dial-up when I was in college, but we won't talk about
Hmm.
that.
Yeah. Oh.
You could actually map the internet back then.
Hmm. It's much harder to do now. You'd be. It's a much more complex series of nodes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, every object is a node. So anyway, where were we? Alignment. Yeah, so alignment is a fundamental part of the game, and definitely it's caused some noses to get bent out of shape a couple times when characters have taken actions that were not in line with their ethos, and I made private changes to the character's alignment score. But alignment, because it's so important to the game, not only for role playing effects, but I also have made it a mechanical effect. That's why it has a number score. You can, as a spellcaster, you add or subtract, as the case may be, your alignment score from different spells, depending on what it is you're trying to cast. And again, this comes back to, say, a lawful magic user attempting to cast a chaotic spell. Their alignment will actually be a penalty towards their spell failure roll.
Hmm.
They'll have a more difficult time casting that spell successfully.
Yep. I like that. That definitely ties the mechanics to it, and it's interesting to put a number on it that implies that it may change. So, like ability scores are pretty static in old school games. I offhand don't remember how they change or don't change in LFG, but you think about hit points, you think about stuff. Other games will have stamina or other effects. Because it's a number, the number can change, and the number has a tangibility to it that the words law or chaos don't necessarily have. You can't be if you say I'm half chaos, then that doesn't mean anything from the purpose of BX. But if you say you're at 1.5 on the chaos scale, I guess minus 1.5, assuming law is positive, then that has a very definitive mechanical tie. It's very easy to conceptualize that, or it's easy for me at least to conceptualize that as a mechanical end. And it's interesting that you talk about tying it to the spellcasting specifically, because that's a incentivizing player behavior. Because if I'm going to learn chaos magic, I need to lean into it. As a munchkin at heart, I'm immediately tempted to figure out as chaotic as I can be without hurting the party, so to speak. I don't want to be sowing the seeds of my own demise, but I'm mechanically incentivized to maximize the effectiveness of my character by acting a certain way, and that's an interesting take, because I'm a big fan of carrots. You've heard of carrot and stick. You can hang the carrot in front of them and beat them with the stick. I'm a big fan of the carrot because I found that players respond very well to rewards, and it's a very easy way to kind of influence player behavior, keep them in line.
That it is. That it is. And I have also found that by creating this alignment statistic or ability score, if you will, that by using it as a mechanical modifier to different activities, it has a much broader application than you might expect. For instance, it can be used in reaction rules, it can be used in persuasion attempts, it can be used in, obviously in spell casting, and so it can be used in morale. If you have a group of henchmen and you hired them in a lawful town and you're leaning towards chaos and something happens and they have to make a morale check, the difference between your alignments is going to be a penalty for their check. And so, if you are more lawful than they are, that would be a bonus to their morale. And so it opens up a lot of avenues for very interesting play.
Very cool. Now, do you use the same base classes as the LFG game, or have you tweaked that, expanded, or contracted the list?
No, I have eliminated the list completely and I have made all new classes that are almost completely customized
Mm-hmm.
for the setting.
Oh,
And
okay.
again, the character I use the character classes as world building. So there are different roles. Uh, I like to say that magic user is a class and cleric is a vocation. Fighter is a class and soldier is a vocation. So the character classes are really broken up into essentially they're all subclasses really. So I have a knight, I have a soldier. Um, in the fighting man class, there is a shepherd who is a person whose background is literally being a mounted caretaker for livestock, and so their skills and starting weapon proficiencies and so on are based on that background. Um, and then we also have basically a monster hunter. My interpretation of a ranger in this post-apocalyptic world.
That's cool. That's an interesting take on Ranger. I was reading a blog post today actually where one of the blogs I follow was complaining about Ranger and how it wasn't implemented in a way that was satisfactory to the fiction that inspired it. But that's an interesting take. Because in a lot of circles, the justification for the cleric class is to juxtapose the Arnisonian cleric with Van Helsing or with Solomon Kane, but thinking about what Van Helsing and Solomon Kane actually did, that sounds akin to what you may be describing in terms of the monster hunter type. Now, would the ranger then be drawn to hunt or eliminate opposing alignment type stuff?
They can. The description I have is that they're called vepitors in this world, and they are the inheritors of ancient scholarship, students of forgotten skills and lore passed on from teacher to student over generations, preserving the legacy through times when the light of civilization has wavered and dimmed.
Hmm.
The idea being that they are well versed in the subtle skills of the wilderness and dangerous opponents in battle. They study ancient lore, and they will develop the ability to wield magic later on. And they are dedicated guardians of civilization and protectors of the weak, hunting the creatures of chaos in the wild places of the world. They depend on perception and strength, and thus will gain a experience bonus for high scores. Then, of course, they start, with certain amounts of armor, and they can later on use liturgical and protection scrolls. They must remain lawful in alignment, or they'll lose their abilities and be treated as ordinary soldiers. And they also, I took a page from the Paladin in that, other than whatever is needed for food, shelter, and level training, a Bepitor must donate all treasure to charities or temples associated with lawful alignment. This
Okay.
restriction is this restriction, though, is lifted when the character becomes a Bepitor knight and builds their own stronghold and creates essentially a training school for
Other
new
Vepitor.
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to maintain the campus if you don't have the if you have to donate all the funding.
That's right. That's right. And then for more world building, rangers in D&D, they get to pick a certain monster. Basically, the Vepitor gains a bonus against large-sized creatures with 3 hit dice or more um, across the board. They tend to be more alert, and then also starting at third level, they're initiated into secrets of the history of the world, which includes knowledge of creatures from beyond the veil, as well as other monstrous creatures that I have not yet unfolded for the players because people haven't completed that 5th level training yet. So we're going to keep sitting on that if you don't mind.
I will anticipate with bated breath what you do with it when they get there. Now, I know that you are on itch.io as World of Weirth. Now, I'm sitting here. I see the Underground Architects Dungeon Ecology, but I don't. Do you have intention to publish the World of Weirth setting or the World of Weirth campaign book in a similar fashion?
I do, and that's going to be after the magic system is fully tested. Um, the I'm blessed with the player group that I have, in that they are really doing everything they can to push the limits and push the envelope of this setting and of this magic system. So we're learning a lot together, and they're helping quite a bit in developing this system and this technique.
Well, very cool, very cool. Now, are you going to crowdfund that? Are you going to do that in house? How do you think you're going to handle that?
That is a great question. I will probably pay someone to help me edit and lay it out. Um, I have It's over 100, and how many pages is it now? My supplement is bigger than the core rule book. Yeah, and it's up to like 140 pages already, and that is, yeah, it's in 10-point text with narrow margins. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to need some help, obviously, doing the editing and laying out to make sure that everything is parallel and says the same thing on page 100 as it does on page 30. Um, but I will likely just release it as a PDF. I don't know. Uh, I don't know that I really am going to charge for it. I think I might do, something available on Lulu
Hmm.
for just over cost. So if someone wants to get a printed one, they can, and I'll make $1. Or maybe I'll just sell it for $1. I don't know. But yeah, I think that in the spirit of the graciousness of the others that have come before me and developing their systems. I mean, I'm having fun doing this, and it's kind of a labor of love. I think if there are any products that I'm going to sell in the future, they will definitely be more along the lines of character class expansions or adventure mode.
Hmm. That makes sense, as evidenced by the my propensity to release free crap on my publishing mechanism, that is blog and Google Docs. I'm with you. I'm with you 100% there. The passion project is the project that's worth reading 9 times out of 10. So,
Yeah. Well, a lot of this is already available on the blog. Um, it's in a draft form, and so yeah, I mean theoretically, it's already there for free if someone wants to spend a few hours doing a copying and pasting.
mhm.
But the final form, I think, will be a fresh new look at a way of building a setting.
Very cool. Hey, and there is a little dude on this skull pile. I saw your pile of skulls logo. I just realized that red thing in the front. That's a dude standing on said skulls. Open image and new tab. That's a bigger skull than I gave it credit for being. Also, to while I'm still sitting on your while I'm still sitting on your itch page, I do see the Underground Architects Dungeon Ecology. That's a inexpensive, looks like PDF, where it talks about the monster, what do monsters eat, where do monsters live, and how to handle that. Can you tell me a little bit about the Underground Architects Dungeon Ecology, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure, that is a little zine that I put together. You can actually take the PDF and print it off um, on the landscape format, um, and let your printer do it booklet style,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can just stack all the pages up and saddle stitch them. Um, but it's set up to describe how the monsters in a dungeon survive, what they eat, and how to create and describe these uh, this food chain, this food pyramid, if you will, so that your dungeon has verisimilitude. And there's a reason that how is this large creature trapped in this big cavern? How could it even get in here? Well, it came in here as a child and was very small, but it's grown because it eats these slimes and these mushrooms and these other creatures that live in the dungeon and the underground areas.
Yep, very cool. Yeah, that's a nice way to tie things together when you don't want to just take the dragon in the 10 by 10 room at their word. Very cool. And that is an exterior product. That is, it's not tied in. It is written by you, obviously, but it's not necessarily tied in to the setting that you're creating.
It's based on the setting. However, I've made it basically system agnostic. That particular product is usable by really any OSR style game or any fantasy role playing game with almost no modification. You create your own monsters. It has blank encounter tables and discusses how to fill them. So it's very much system agnostic.
Yep, very very cool. So we got a chance this evening to talk through some LFG, why you picked the LFG game. Got some fun insight there that's true to my experience as well, regarding players and their perceptions. So you come in with D&D and they already have an idea of what needs to be there. We talked a little bit about the magic system and how it factors in with alignment, learning spells, casting spells. I'm a big fan of corruption tables or dangerous magic. I think that adds a layer of depth to it that was absent in some of the older games. And we found you on social media here. Social media. I don't know if I don't know if itch counts as social, but I definitely found your Twitter, and we're gonna post the blog link, the all this other stuff onto the show notes. And so we've gotten through a bunch of cool stuff, very interesting subject material, very we'll call it refreshing, I guess, because when you get hit with something that's new and different, it piques the curiosity, and that's what we're doing for me as we're talking through this kind of stuff. So I think we've hit all the notes that we wanted to hit, or that at least I anticipated we would. But I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave off without giving you a chance to capstone me. If there's something I missed, if there's something we'd like to dive into, or if you'd just like to give a sign off, I will cede the floor to you, good sir.
I first, I'd like to thank you for having me on your show. I was very honored to get the invitation, and I believe that we have covered a wide range of topics. I know when you first discussed having me on the show, we were just going to talk about the magic system, but as you can see, the magic system is, it is part of the world building, and like I said, I've been very interested in the last 3 or 4 years about really diving into the origins of the system and what the implied setting implies for the method of play.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
I'm applying those as best I can. Um, I will not, try to put forth that I'm playing anything rules as written. I'm certainly no hardliner when it comes to that. However, I am a firm believer in determining the intention of the rules and the type of game that Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax were trying to create and promote across the community. Um, Having said that, there's probably a little more to do about chainmail, which we didn't discuss at all, and mass combat in the role playing world. But we'll save that for another conversation. Maybe we'll throw that onto my YouTube channel, which, if anyone's still listening and you're interested in that at all, is called Purple Druid Presents Wargame Culture. And myself and a couple other of my pals are doing a bunch of digging in archaeology and researching the old mass combat systems for all of the major role playing games, starting with chainmail and working our way up. So
Yep.
it's been really exciting, and it's probably going to keep us busy in content through the end of the year.
Yep, a very fun series. As someone who came into the hobby through wargaming, a very fun series for me to walk through, and a topic I have a lot of opinions on, but a topic that will have to wait for its own podcast. So,
Definitely. I look forward to that one. I definitely want to get and put you in the hot seat.
oh, absolutely, and I will remember. I will remember to stop by the liquor store on the way home, so I'm ready. So that's it. I was all sad tonight because while I was setting up the recording equipment, I went to the kitchen to get my patented skull-shaped mug, and I thought I had the Terrapin Brewery out of Atlanta produces a seasonal milk stout called the Moo-Hoo. It's got a picture of their mascot, which is of course a turtle, wearing a cow suit, and I thought that I had found those buy one get one free at our local grocery store, so I had a 12 pack, but I cannot find them. So I guess when I go to work, things just kind of disappear or move to other places. So I have been sipping a blue Gatorade. But it has not hurt my cognition. So maybe blue Gatorade is the way to go with these kind of conversations. And but
That's that's great advice.
you know, blue Gatorade, perfect. So again, I do want to say thank you for coming on. Thank you for spending this Monday night with me to chat about role-playing games and elf magic. Very fun subject, very cool thing, and I do look forward to collaborating with you in the future. I thank you also, everybody on the other end of the speaker. Thank you for listening. Thank you for putting up with me through all these episodes. And between now and when we talk again, delve on. The Clear Square Ring Mail podcast is an independently owned and operated product released for educational and informative purposes under the Totally Steal This license, which is kind of like Creative Commons, except licensing. Segments recorded within a vehicle are recorded using a Bluetooth hands-free device in conjunction with local vehicular safety legislation. Theme music for the Clear Square Ring Mail podcast is Gold Coffee by Michael Vermeer C., retrieved from Mixkit.co and used under the Mixkit royalty-free music license. Sound effects used in the Clear Square Ring Mail podcast are also retrieved from Mixkit.co and used in accordance with the Mixkit free sound effects license. Clear Square Ring Mail does not ascribe to nor endorse views or opinions expressed by call-ins, guests, or even the host, unless you think they're awesome, and thus does not assume any liability regarding the consumption or distribution of this podcast. By listening to the Clear Square Ring Mail podcast, you agree to these provided terms. Parties with questions regarding these terms, conditions, or releases are encouraged to reach out to Clear Square Ring Mail at the prescribed methods provided on the Clerics Wearing Mail blog. Parties dissatisfied with these terms, conditions, or releases are encouraged to go suck an egg.